This is GordoTEK. First, a quick update. I am working on many projects right now, and there will be lots of new content in the future. However, I've found that certain content cannot be posted on YouTube without risk of having my account suspended. That means a lot of my work will not be posted here. Instead, what I've done is made all of my content available for streaming and downloads on Patreon, but I have decided to make it completely free to everyone. There is no need to give a dime if you don't want to. People that choose to support this work can do so. This is basically like the NPR model, only you won't see me doing begathons for pledges like they do. If you feel like supporting my content, that's up to you. Jar-based mycology kit review. Many people over the years have asked me what is the easiest and most foolproof way for a total novice with no equipment or experience to grow a small supply of mushrooms with the least hassle. Well, first I just want to point out that I did make a very thorough video showing how to grow mushrooms from scratch without a kit, going all the way from spores to drying and encapsulating and everything in between. I'll put a link in the video description for that. I also created a video showing how to use a kit to do a bulk grow, which simplifies things for a beginner and still gets you high yields. In this video, I'll show you the simplest kit method, a jar-based grow. It will have lower yields, but it's nearly foolproof. This kit was given to me by MidWest Grow Kits, and they also created an affiliate link for me, so if you're interested in the kit or any of their other products, use the link in the description and it will help support this channel. These guys have been in business since 2003 and have been steadily growing every year. They now have an 8,000 square foot facility in the Chicago area with 18 employees, and they are one of the top kit sellers in the US. They also have fantastic reviews online and even offer live customer support by phone and online chat. They sell several different types of kits, and they also have a small flow hood with good reviews for anyone that's ready to take things to the next level. So let's start with the unboxing of this kit. The first thing I see here is just a little card telling you where you can download the latest written instructions. Everything comes nestled inside of two large plastic totes. And you can see there's some printed instructions for setting this up. As you can see, there are color pictures and step-by-step instructions. There's a submersible heater, LED lighting, and nitrile gloves, and an air pump hose to go with the air pump. Digital thermometer and hygrometer so you can check your temperatures and humidity levels. An easy to use programmable timer. An LED push light. And an air pump. Finally, here are the actual grow jars. There are 12 pint-sized jars filled with a sterilized substrate mix. Each jar is covered with foil on top. MidWest Grow Kits does not sell spores, so you'll have to buy those separately. The nice thing about this jar-based kit versus a bulk kit is that you can try as many different species or strains as you want, all at the same time. Having 12 jars also means if some jars contaminate, you will likely have other jars that don't, versus a bulk kit where contamination could ruin the entire grow. I thought it would be fun to do inoculations 3 different ways to see if any particular method resulted in less contamination. We'll start with just an open-air spore injection. This is the simplest method and requires no extra work or precautions. Wipe your hands down first with isopropyl alcohol, then flame sterilize your spore syringe injection needle. Apply the flame until it glows orange. Note that there were 2 layers of foil on each jar. I removed the top layer, but left the lower layer remaining. There are holes underneath the foil in the lid of the jar, so I'm just going to poke until I find the hole, and then inject directly through the foil and hole. And I will squirt just a tiny bit of spore solution up against the glass of the jar, and change the angle, and then inject slightly more. You really only need to inject from 1 hole, but you can do it from 2 holes if you want. After I'm done with this inoculation, I replace the top foil layer and then move on to the next jar. You can switch species or strains with every jar if you want. It's good to plan out in advance how much solution you have and how much you can put into each jar. You don't want to run out. I'll just show you one more time how I do this. I remove the outer foil layer but leave the lower one. Flame sterilize the spore syringe, and then with sanitized hands I can actually search for those holes in the lid, and once I find one, inject the spore solution directly through the foil. Here I'm just moving the foil up so you can see the spore syringe needle and the spore solution going in, but you want to keep the foil down when you actually do this. You might have to poke around a little bit until you find that hole, but it's no big deal since the foil is sterile and the spore syringe needle is also sterile. So you can just repeat this simple process for all of your jars, or you can try doing this a different way, which I'll show next. Another way this could be done is inside of a still air box. You could also use a flow hood if you have one. So here we just put the jars inside our still air box, and we're going to do the injections inside of the still air box. We start by misting the inside of the still air box. This knocks any possible contamination down from the air so it settles on the bottom. Then we just flame sterilize our spore syringe needle and do the injections like we did before. The third and final way in which I did inoculations was with the oven technique. So to do this, you start with putting the oven at 300 degrees and waiting until it gets up to temperature. Once it's hit 300, you actually turn it down to 225 and then open the oven door. I should note that this is the method that MidWest Grow Kits recommends, and it is the method described in their written instructions. That said, all three methods worked fine for me, and I had no contamination with any of them. So I think it's really up to you. I would probably just keep it simple and do the first method, which is just a straight injection in open air, unless you've had problems with contamination before. So now we're going to set up the incubation chamber, and we'll take out this aquarium heater. It is designed to be fully submerged in water. We'll set an initial temperature. I set mine to about 86. This requires a little trial and error. The actual temperature in the incubation chamber is going to be a little bit lower than what you set this heater to. We'll use those suction cups on the bottom to stick it to the bottom of one of the totes. Next, we're going to fill this tote with some warm water. As you can see, it's about a little more than halfway full. Now put this in your final grow area and plug it in. Add the other tote to this lower tote so that it is touching the warmed water. This will create a nice, warm, humid environment for your incubation and later for the mushroom cultivation. Add all of your labeled jars to this incubation chamber. Add the included thermometer and hygrometer so you can monitor the temperature and humidity. This will help you tweak things to get the environment just right. You may need to make small adjustments to the temperature. If your room temperature is very cold, you may wish to add some insulation by putting blankets or clothing over the totes. It may take several hours before things stabilize in there and you get an accurate reading. After a few days, if all goes well, you may see some growth, but be patient. This can take up to 3 weeks, sometimes even longer. Also note that every jar may be growing at a different rate, so some jars may be way farther along than other jars. If you see any green or other colors, it's a sign of contamination, and you'll probably want to remove and discard any jars like that. Here is a 20-day time lapse of the colonizing jars. When the mycelium gets down towards the bottom, it can sometimes help to flip the jars upside down in order to finish colonizing the very bottom part of the jar. This is because water can pool at the bottom, which inhibits mycelial growth. Once the jars are fully colonized, including all white on the bottom, you can bring them over to a sink, rub down in isopropyl alcohol, get some Ziploc bags, and then we're going to flip each jar upside down and smack it. It helps to use a rubber mallet, but you can also just smack it with your hand. This will loosen the colonized substrate to make it easier to remove from the jar. You can rinse off any loose substrate, and then we're going to stick it inside of the Ziploc bag and fill the Ziploc bag with water. Carefully squeeze out any air and then close the bag and set it in a bowl. Repeat all of these steps for every colonized jar. As I said before, since some of these jars are going to colonize at different rates, you may have to do these on different dates. But we can get at least several of them started at this point and add the rest as they become available. You can optionally transfer this bowl to a refrigerator and leave it overnight. Some believe the cold encourages pin development. The next day, I will begin by wiping down with isopropyl alcohol, and then we're going to take the included big bag of perlite and fill it with water. After that, I'll strain it a little bit to remove the excess water, and then dump this into the tote. This will help keep the humidity levels very high for fruiting. You can then level this out by hand. You can optionally add a cup of hydrogen peroxide to this damp perlite. This will help prevent contamination from growing in the perlite. Next, we're going to take each of these birthed and hydrated cakes and we're going to roll it in vermiculite. This is optional but recommended. And then we're just going to stand it up in our terrarium on a piece of foil. Repeat this process for all of your cakes. You may optionally wish to add some hydrogen peroxide to the heated water, again to prevent contamination from growing there. I'm going to adjust the temperature down slightly now so that our fruiting temperature will be somewhere around the mid-70s. The exact temperature is not critical, but I like to keep it below 80. Now we can just add our terrarium to the heated water tote and put the cover on top and we're ready to go. These should begin fruiting within several days, possibly up to 10 days. I'm going to thoroughly mist that vermiculite that we've rolled each of these cakes in so that the humidity levels all around the cake remain high at all times. Next we're going to add the air pump. The kit came with this blue hose with a filter inside of it so that only filtered air will actually be pumped into the terrarium. There's a small hole at the top of the terrarium and you can just insert this blue hose through that hole. You can see the filter right there. And then we can plug that air pump into a timer. You can see with this wet perlite the humidity is now up to 94%, which is great. The temperature is still a little high, so I might adjust that lower. You can add those uncolonized jars back to the terrarium and let them continue colonizing. And you can mist daily or as needed. You can see the humidity is still at 97% and the temperature is now down to about 75 degrees, which is about perfect. Now we're going to add the LED lighting. You'll notice there's a sticker on the lid of this tote. We're going to peel that sticker off and the light will go in the hole that's there. You can either plug this into a timer or you can just manually turn it on and off, but you should have 12 hours of light every day and 12 hours of darkness. And here's a peek inside. You can see already there's some pins there, so that's a very good sign. This is the timer included with the kit. It's very easy to use. Each half-hour increment has its own button, so you can just push each button that you want, and we'll do 1/2 an hour, 4 times a day to turn the air pump on in this case. You can see that set up here. A couple of days later and those pins have developed into full mushrooms, so you can harvest them either by cutting them or by gently twisting them off. Some of the other jars are nearly fully colonized now as well, so we'll be adding them soon to the terrarium for fruiting. At this point, you just need to check progress daily and mist if needed, but you can see the humidity level is very high in the terrarium, so not much misting is required. You can harvest anytime you see fully developed mushroom caps that have opened. If you do not intend to consume the mushrooms within a few days, it is best to preserve them using a dehydrator. I recommend you split each mushroom in half or quarters and spread them out on a dehydrator with a temperature setting around 145 Fahrenheit or 63 Celsius. Some of the cakes tend to produce far more mushrooms than others, but over time they generally even out. The other cakes are all ready now, and they've been soaked overnight and dunked and rolled, and now I'm putting them into the terrarium. Here's another harvest. And a little misting. The newly added cakes are a different species, so they grow slightly differently, but it doesn't really make much difference. We'll just keep checking these daily and harvesting as necessary. If you want to make a spore print, here's how you can do it. Take a cap, twist it off, stick it on some foil, and put a mason jar or any type of glass over top of it. Getting back to that spore print, so you want to do this next part in a still air box or in front of a flow hood. Wipe down your gloved hands and your work area with isopropyl alcohol. Then remove your glass covering, dump the mushroom cap, and place your spore print in a Ziploc bag. It will properly dry inside the sterile bag, and the spores will be viable for several years. You can also do a whole bunch of caps at one time, as shown. You might want to fold that foil over before putting it in your Ziploc bag. Be sure to label the bag with the name of the species and the date. After each flush, you can re-soak your cakes in water overnight to rehydrate them. A gentle squeezing can help force water into the cake, kind of like a sponge. You will know this is working if you see air bubbles coming out, but try not to damage the cake. You should see new pins forming within a day or two of the rehydrating. And sometimes you'll also notice mycelia growing on the outside of the cake. This is okay, it's not contamination, but it can be a sign of excessive humidity. You can expect anywhere from 2 to 4 flushes per cake, with dwindling volume from each flush. If you notice any of the cakes looking contaminated, for example, you may see green, red, black, or other colored spots that seem to be spreading, or you smell sweet or sour odors, you want to discard those contaminated cakes as soon as possible outside of your home. Alright, let's summarize the pros and cons of this jar-style based grow kit. The pros first. It's very beginner friendly. If you have no experience growing mushrooms, it's a great way to get started. It allows you the option of growing many different species or strains at one time. This gives you variety, which can help you quickly discover what type of mushrooms you would like to focus later on growing. You have many backups in case of contamination. For example, if 2 jars contaminate, you still have 10 more good ones. Now let's talk about the cons. Lower total yields compared to a bulk grow. It requires more spore solution or liquid culture, so you might have to buy 2 spore syringes instead of 1. Overall, I was completely satisfied with all components included with the kit. I had no problems with any of the hardware or instructions, and it was very easy to cultivate multiple species of mushrooms. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this kit review. Look for new content coming soon.